Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Jason, for setting up my talk so well. I'm here to talk about the Biodiversity Management Framework, which is one of the environmental management frameworks that Jason discussed. And I'll be focusing mostly on the lower Athabasca BMF because that's the one that we're closest to completion. So this work obviously involves a lot of people, mostly at the Land Use Framework Regional Planning Branch, but also at ABMI as well as AMERA. So today I'll be giving a really brief overview of the BMF, which is the acronym for the Biodiversity Management Framework. If we can hold that in your head. It's a really complicated framework, so I'm just going to give a very brief overview and pull out some key points. I'm going to focus on the indicators that we've chosen, partially because I come from an ecology and scientific background, and so I'd be most involved in developing the scientific indicators, and it's what I'm quite interested in. And then I also tried to pull out any soil science pieces that I could find throughout the BMF. So whatever had a soil relevance to soil science, I put this little guy here. I don't know what the technical name for him would be because I am not a soil scientist. So the Biodiversity Management Frameworks, as well as their context within the regional plans that Jason discussed, are part of essentially a biodiversity management system which we have. It starts at the national level with the Canadian Biodiversity Strategy. At the provincial level, we have the Biodiversity Policy, which is still in draft form. And then at the regional level, we have the Biodiversity Management Frameworks for each of the land use planning regions. These operate at a regional scale, and they're meant to operate at a regional scale. We still have the tools at the local level. So for example, species recovery plans and the sub-regional land management plans that are going to be supporting and working with the BMF. The BMF is intended to meet the outcomes established in the regional plans. So as Jason discussed in the lower Athabasca regional plan, one of the outcomes is that landscapes are managed to maintain ecosystem function and biodiversity. And so that's the real outcome that we're focused on achieving with the BMF. And the BMF is the main tool for managing the regional cumulative effects on biodiversity. And as I said, so far only the lower Athabasca BMF is in draft form, and so most of what I'm referring to throughout the presentation from now on are examples from the lower Athabasca. Quick overview of the system, and I think this will make more sense as I go through the slides. We've developed indicators and triggers, and we monitor and model these biodiversity indicators, and we evaluate, report, and respond so that we can discern when a trigger for an indicator has been reached. Throughout this, there are proactive management actions to manage land disturbance. So what are indicators? The indicators are measurable variables that represent valued components of biodiversity health. These are key species, habitats, or landscapes. If you're familiar with any of the other management frameworks, such as the air, groundwater, you will be familiar with this kind of a setup. And the purpose of the indicators is to provide information on overall regional biodiversity condition. We also have triggers for each of the indicators, and we've developed a risk-based approach for the triggers so that to set the triggers, we compare the current condition of the biodiversity indicator to the condition under a reference. So under, let's say, an undisturbed or historical reference condition. And the further the indicator's current condition is from that historical reference condition, the less change we tolerate before a trigger is reached. Crossing the triggers identifies a need for a management response and then possibly a management action. Monitoring is conducted primarily by AMERA, Alberta Environmental Monitoring, Evaluation and Reporting Agency, ABMI, Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, JOSM, and ESRD. And then AMERA will report on the status of the biodiversity indicators. ESRD is responsible for the management response, and this will be done in conjunction with Emera's reporting on ambient condition. And part of that management response is determining the need, of any, for management actions. So a trigger might be reached, but with further investigation, it might be decided that there is no management action needed at this time. And so there are two different pieces, the management response and the management action. The management actions themselves become more stringent if an indicator moves into higher threshold or trigger levels. So as the current condition, if it's lower in respect to that reference condition, you can expect more stringent management action. So now I'm going to go into more detail of some of the indicators that we have chosen for the Lower Athabasca BMF. We have 4 categories of indicators. So we have species and habitat indicators, and we have terrestrial and aquatic indicators. So it works out to be 4 pyramids. We have the terrestrial species, aquatic species, terrestrial habitat, and aquatic habitat pyramids. So if we break these down for the Lower Athabasca, we have a total of 12 indicators that have triggers associated with them. At this top level here, what we call Tier 1, we have indicators that will remain consistent across all the land use framework planning regions. So you can expect to see these again for all the other regions. We have terrestrial biodiversity intactness, wetland biodiversity intactness. These are really broad category or broad indices which tell us how species are doing, and I'll go into more detail about that later. We have terrestrial native cover, aquatic native cover, and then in Tier 2 we have indicators that are developed specifically for the Lower Athabasca. So in the terrestrial species pyramid we have woodland caribou, non-native vascular plants. Aquatic species we have Arctic grayling and walleye. The terrestrial habitat we have wood forest and interior habitat, and aquatic habitat we have fen and lotic connectivity. And these are the ones that had some kind of a soil relevance that I'm going to expand on in a little more detail. I'd like to stop here and just say that this is all under construction, and I can almost assure you that some of these indicators are going to change. The BMF is currently in draft form, so warn you not to get too attached to any of these indicators because I'm currently working on rejigging some of them essentially. Sources of information for the indicators. The information is going to come both from geospatial imagery and from field monitoring programs. And in some cases, the indicators will actually put these 2 types of information together. General statement is that the BMF will use the best available data. So we do go out and do full scoping of what's available or what's possible for these indicators. So I'm going to go through those indicators that had some soil relevance in a little more detail. Native terrestrial land cover is the total amount of undisturbed terrestrial land cover in the region. It indicates the amount of habitat being lost or converted. Of course, habitat loss is identified globally as one of the leading cause of biodiversity loss, and so this is a very well-suited first-tier indicator. And as I said, it's used in all the left planning regions. I'm less familiar with the boreal region because I did most of my research before coming to government in the rangelands, but I certainly know that in the south of the province and in grasslands, an undisturbed soil varies greatly from a disturbed soil in terms of soil biodiversity and properties such as carbon storage. And so you can see these indicators, especially this one, as being a coarse filter approach that includes soil as well. We have terrestrial biodiversity intactness, and intactness is an index that's developed by ABMI. It essentially compares the current abundance of the terrestrial native species in the region against what would be expected under undisturbed conditions. This is a composite indicator, and we have 6 taxa that compose the larger index. So we have mammals, birds, plants, lichens, mosses, and soil mites. Of course, mites are important for soil health. And I also think that having these indicators helps raise the profile of their component parts. So, for example, through their sampling of soil mites, ABMI has found a number of mite species that are new to science, and all of these feed up into this larger Intactness index. At the Tier 2 level, we have interior habitat, which is the amount of land cover which is a certain distance from human footprint, in this case defined as 100 meters from human footprint. This is to ensure that there is sufficient habitat quality for core species, for species that require core habitat, and it acts as a proxy for edge effects from footprint. The soil application here, I thought right away of my friend Erin Cameron, who's done research on earthworm invasion in the boreal, and finding that roads are a vector of earthworm invasion. And so this indicator would speak to that. And the final indicator that we're doing a review of is fen cover. Fen is a type of wetland, supports the life cycle needs of many species, and they're very difficult to restore, and so the objective is to prevent the loss of fens. Soil application is that peatlands contain more than half of the organic soil, or organic carbon that's contained in all Canadian soils. And I did have a slide put in here which was the state of the BMF currently. So I can go over this really quickly without the slide, which is that the BMF for the lower Athabasca will be finalized in spring 2015. And so it is in draft form, but we're going to be rolling it out soon. Next, we're moving on to the South Saskatchewan and the North Saskatchewan BMFs, and those are slated to be completed by the end of the year.